I'm gonna move.
Maybe we.
Good evening, all you citizens from the Southeast region of the Nishnawbe Nation. My name is Patrick Medali. I'm the Commissioner on Governance for the Nishnawbe. We have a very important discussion here tonight on this virtual medium. And I'm going to go through the agenda here very shortly, but I just want to make a few comments with respect to just how crucial and important this issue is about those that belong in terms of citizenship in our communities. We have to send a very strong message to the government of Canada to quit tinkering as usual, as they have done many, many times, about trying to determine who our citizens are. We are the only ones that have the inherent right and rights recognized by the Constitution of Canada and recognized by the United Nations Declaration, and most importantly, our inherent right to determine who our people are. We know who our families are. And the government is tinkering again, and they're looking at consulting communities over the next several months, and they're advocating something called a two-parent rule, which isn't really another solution. All it does is delay the elimination of our people by one generation. So we have come up with a recently Bendowjik conference in Sault Ste. Marie with a draft declaration that we're communicating to the people over the next several weeks, culminating perhaps at a Grand Council where this declaration will be eventually adopted. But we want to send Canada a very strong message and be very proactive, telling Canada that, it's up to us and be united as a Nishnawbe Nation, relying on our inherent rights to, tell them that they got to quit tinkering with our citizenship. So tonight's agenda is a program from 6:30 as we've just started. We hope to be done by 8 o'clock. There will be some opportunity for some questions and answers, and you'll be directed to put any of your questions into the chat. And we'll have Dave Shauna monitoring that, and we'll have answers from perhaps the panel that's here in attendance. We're coming to you from the Manitoulin Hotel and Convention Center in Manitoulin Island, where there's Lands and Resources Water Symposium going on. So the agenda is again, we're going to have our from the Lake Huron region, the Getsik Advisory Council, Donna Dabowski, start us off with the Goodwill and Guns in Anishinaabe, and then our Southeast Regional Chief Marcia Smoke, who also holds the portfolio for the Bendowjik, and as a member of the Leadership Council, will be making some opening remarks. Then a very important person here is our hero, Jeanette Corbin-Laval, who is our Citizenship Commissioner, and she's going to be talking about the work that was done on the declaration with respect to the Bendowjik. And then we'll have an opportunity for participants to participate and provide some feedback on the declaration discussion. And then obviously we should be commenting so you're aware of what the federal government is trying to do. So our Southeast Regional Chief, Marcia Smoke, and later in the that particular section, Dave Shauna, are going to talk about some of the processes that are going on with these Indian Act amendments, with the second generation cutoff, Section 10 voting threshold, and information relating to Bill C-38.
Pat, I'm going to stop you right there. Pat,
yeah.
Can you turn the computer to face you a little bit, just so your voice is getting caught in the mic a little bit better?
Sorry.
A little bit more.
How's that?
That's okay. Yeah,
okay.
Better.
So after that, around 7:35, we're going to be talking about how we were planning on implementing First Nation jurisdiction on with the citizenship law. Dogjig Knocknagawin. And we'll have a representative from the Mocknagon, Leslie McGregor, will be participating at that section. And then we will have some opportunity for questions and answers, and then we'll have some closing remarks. So that's the program for the evening. Again, go into chat with your questions, and really, again, thank you for making some time for us tonight. So without any further ado, I'm going to call on our gets it from the advisory council, Donna Dabaski, to do the good way when Gaza and Shnabe.
Miigwech. Osho, if the quitting the go on the Shabe Queen dog, geek one do them away, she kegin in Ginot Magna. Nidom the singing in Benjaboy come from Benjaji, carbonation cut the getting of the Avenjakovnigo. Gitzimak Bon Wagosh Minon, Stella Nakagish or Quigishn Castle. So I've introduced myself in my spirit name, which is Baby the Quedang, which means the sound of the little thunders that come before the big thunders. I'm Anishinaabe, and I'm from the Fish Clan, and our clan leader, of course, is the turtle. And I'm from the Domnising, Wigwam Kong, and I just wanted to recite the Godongis and Anishinaabe for us, because this is, and it's on the screen there, so just follow along, and I'll go slow so that people can say the words as we proceed. Debenchget isan Anishinaabe Haking Gibet Gongaden Nitowatsun Shkoden Be Ke Noden Gibet Gostonan Winagden Ming Mapishkat Mikang. Debenchget Giminan Getstowendao Kanishnaben Wanagdojen Nandan Nishoswe Kinomadwinan. Sagitwin Deboywin Naden Moin Bokawin Baden Diswin Bekotsuin Minoshak Dewin. Debenchget Kimin Gonadet Bune Winagdoen Dean. Kamnaden Danaga Pishoebak Minogen Nangomego Eshoebak Minoge Yabewan Eshoebak. So this is what we recite at the beginning of any gatherings, any meetings that we have as a Anishinaabe Nation. It's a very important foundational piece of our constitution, of our Chinaknigewin, and it sets in place so many of our teachings. They're all contained in this. I guess it was the preamble to the constitution during the development of Chinaknigewin, and it speaks to all those things that we were given, the responsibilities, our roles as Anishinaabe people, all the teachings that were given to us, and then how we always keep in mind the 7 generations prior, and then where we're at now today, and then the 7 generations to come. We always have to keep those things in place so that our children and our great grandchildren will have, the same gifts that we were given by Debenchget. We need to make sure that we always keep this at the forefront, because it's, like I said, it's such a foundational part of who we are, and it contains so much of the teaching. So with that, I'm very happy that I'm part of this meeting, and I'm happy to have recited the Godongis and Anishinaabe for the group. Miigwech, 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 miigwech.
Miigwech, Donna. And again, as you say, a very important document. All of us, as we went through school and the educational process, we came, about to learn things. And, I still remember how we learned how in Flanders fields the poppies grow,
Right.
that poem. And it should be the same thing over time. We should hear and learn about, Goodway and Gazet, so that it becomes a regular, very important document that we all know. And there's many teachings in there. And one of the important teachings in there is that we still have our sovereignty. And that's why this is so important about the right to determine our own citizenship. So I'm going to now introduce the Southeast Regional Chief, Marcia Smoke. As I said earlier, she holds a citizenship portfolio for the Anishinaabe Nation Leadership Council. She's an Alderville First Nation citizen with many years of political and entrepreneurial experience. I recall Marcia working years ago with the Chiefs of Ontario and the Anishinaabe Nation on many fronts, and very active. Even working with the Quebec folks at one time, and and at national level, provincial, every level. So brings many years of experience, and I think last summer when she was put in the position of the Southeast Regional Chief, it was a very wise decision. To have someone with that kind of experience, at the helm to work with the communities from the South East region. So with that, here's Marcia Smoke.
Okay. Miigwech, Patrick, Mr. Chairman, for the introduction. Miigwech to Nokomis Donna Dubosiki, leading us this evening with your kind words to guide us. Ani Bojo, Kwe, Nigani Makwa Kwe, Indigenous Cause, Makwan Dodam, Pamadushkode, Young Dunjabo. Coming to you this evening from the Robinson Huron Treaty Territory, and in the Manitoulin Hotel, where we're having a very important meeting here this week on the water. And so I'd like to just say miigwech to our veterans. I always acknowledge our veterans when I start our meetings, and the ancestors as well for watching over us and guiding us. I'm very proud to serve the Southeast region as the regional chief for the Anishinaabe Nation. And one of the roles that I have is to be the portfolio for the Anishinaabe Nation on citizenship. And this is really timely. It's something that I've been following for my whole life, back when Jeanette first started her journey to have our rights recognized, and for the women that were left out. And one of the messages that my mother always told us was never leave anyone behind. And with that, it's something that's traveled with me for my entire life. And this is one huge issue that has been constant ever since I was a kid growing up. So I'd like to welcome everyone to our virtual engagement this evening. For those that are online, from our communities and your family members, and those who have a distinct interest in looking at the work that has to be done on citizenship. With all the events going on in the world, and we know what they are. We know they're about tariffs, and we know they're about this whole business of the 51st state of the United States. But we can't be distracted by that. We have very important work because of the actions of government that continues to this day. And we have to be mindful of that, and we have to stay focused on this work, because this is all time sensitive as well. So our work this evening will continue to set the framework to bring the rest of our relatives back into our family circles who have been excluded by the government legislation under the Indian Act. And just a message that our Grand Council Chief made in the last couple of days is that we are at a critical time where we must act quickly from a position of unity and strength to respond to another impending threat to our sovereignty and nationhood, represented by Canada's collaborative process on the second generation cutoff and the Section 10 voting thresholds. So with with her message, there's things that are in play, and a lot of this it stems from a number of significant court cases, but those court cases are being overshadowed, and I'll be able to talk more about that when I give the presentation later on. But I just want to, you know, make sure that, you know, all of the information is out there tonight as well. We welcome your comments, we welcome your feedback, and I just want to, you know, just say thank you for the opportunity to, for me to be able to provide opening remarks this evening, and I'll come back with you shortly. Thank you very much, Patrick.
Thank you, Marcia. You know, there's been times in our journey as Anishinaabe people where, you know, we've had to stand up to the government. And we're at one of those critical moments now where I think we have to send the government a very strong message, much like we did during the constitutional talks when the Anishinaabe Nation came up with the declaration of our nations. We are nations, we've always been nations. So now we're at the critical juncture again, where Canada is trying to again eliminate our citizens, and we have to create our own laws. So this work that's been undertaken to develop a declaration on a Bendauji, a declaration on those that belong to our communities, is absolutely crucial. So that's why we're presenting this tonight, and over the next several weeks and months, it's going to be so crucial. And Jeanette Carter-Laval has been a champion of defending the rights, especially the rights of a woman. And she's a citizen of Okanagan Unceded Territory, and has been a recipient of many awards and honorary doctorates for her lifelong work, you know, to protect the rights of Anishinaabe women and children. And 2007 2009, Jeanette met with the Anishinaabe citizens and leaders to develop the Bendauji Nalkanagilan, and was ratified by the Anishinaabe Grand Council. And our citizenship laws is our response to the second generation cutoff and the loss of our citizens through the loss of the Indian status under the Indian Act. So our citizenship law, Bendauji Nalkanagilan, is based on the one parent rule. It's a framework law for your First Nation citizenship laws. We know who belongs to our communities, we know our families. So tonight, we're building consensus on this national position as a Anishinaabe nation. It's a declaration on the Bendauji, those who belong, roughly meaning our citizenship. So I'm going to turn it over to our keynote presenter tonight, Jeanette Carter-Laval.
Thank you to all who are part of the group to present this to all of you. Mino kinawaya odeyarchik, abzindagachik. Indai kunagi noakadam, but migochen menim noa. I'm thanking all of you who are in your homes and listening to us, because it's so important, and I feel the urgency of the importance of all of us showing that unity and looking at our people, recognizing our sovereign rights, recognizing that as Anishinaabe people, we have been on this land, a kid that we call Turtle Island, for thousands of years, and we know for sure that, and it's getting proven. So, and now when we look at what is happening on the political scene with the intrusion by the countries south of us and us here in Canada, it's even more important that we assert our inherent rights, and we know that we are responsible for taking that action on implementing our sovereignty. So having said that, it's been explained by Pat and Marcia that this has been ongoing now for 20 years or something. But now's the time that let's look at the work that we are doing right now, and let's see what we can accomplish by coming together, speaking to each other, and sharing. And as was pointed out, we worked on a one parent rule, which obviously is the only way to go. And the government, as you will find out, they're going with a two-parent rule, which is going to be even more restrictive. And that is, it's totally unacceptable. So we're going to have to deal with that. But that is what's currently on their agenda. But we got together at the end of January in Baoting, Sault Ste. Marie, and we came up with a strong recommendations on what should be part of our declaration on Edibendausichik. And as has been pointed out, we know who our people are. We know those who belong. And we also recognize that time is of the essence because we need to really ensure that we have our history, our teachings, and our language in order for us to be that strong nation. So in Sault Ste. Marie, in Baoting, we came up with quite a few actual recommendations, I guess I will say, quite a few of them. And they were all put together. And then we, a group of us, we looked at all that. And then the next meeting that also took place in Baoting, we had a group of our Anishinaabe elders, Anishinaabe, the ones who speak our language. And we put those initial 7 key principles of Edibendausichik. This is our draft declaration. And as you will find out later, it will be looked at again at our General Assembly. So right now it's in draft form, but you can see it ahead of you on your screens. I have to put my Shkijo cardigan on so I can see it, but bear with me. Okay, this is what we came up with. And all those teachings and those principles are going to be our guides. That will be what will take us into coming up with our own Edibendausichik Naknigewe. And we'll be able to have that unity, that sense of saying, we are united. And no matter what all those other outside governments are going to do, we know that we can be strong and we will have our people supporting us. So I'd like to take a little bit of time and go through some of those principles. And when we go through them, you'll see it is in Anishinaabe, and I will, because of time, I'll go through the 7 in English, but you can see right in front of you, they've all been put into Anishinaabe. Miigwech to our Anishinaabe for doing it, and they were able to do this, and it's so good to see that we still have our people able to do this. So the first one that we looked at and came out of that discussion was the Creator placed Anishinaabe on earth along with the gift of spirituality. And that is so true. We know that as Anishinaabe people, the essence of who we are, our relationship to all other aspects, we are at the bottom of that hierarchy, and we need all the rest of the Creator's gift to us, but we do have that essential gift of spirituality. That was the first one. Secondly, Creator gave us sovereignty to govern ourselves. Well, already talked about that, and we keep stressing that, and we can do it if we come together in unity. Number 3, we belong to the land and we follow our own laws. Well, this is so essential because when we talk about Edibendausichik, those who belong, when people say the Bendawas, they're saying, I belong to my family. I belong to my community. I belong to this land. This is where I was born. This is where my ancestors are. And this is where, when the time comes for me to leave this level here, this is where I want to be with my ancestors. And that's the land and the laws that go along with it. 4, we have the right to determine who our people are. Well, once again, that's so obvious. Other governments determine who their people are, and we are a strong nation. So we have that right, and it's also guaranteed to us. We just have to start doing it. 5, through our own governance principles and structures, we decide who belongs. And once again, as others have pointed out, we know who our people are. We can trace it through our own stories that are handed down by our elders, by our relatives, by the community when they get together and want to share different aspects. We know who our people are, and that's our source of information and knowledge. So 6, together, all of us, we take care of each other, the earth, the water, air, fire, and all our relations. Well, those are the key aspects of our teachings, our spirituality. And then all our relations, we recognize that all the other beings that have been put on here, we are meant for us to all work together, and we can share and we can help each other. We're not meant to destroy or supersede and harm them, but we can do that. And lastly, and this is a long one, but it's all in the Anishinaabe, and when we assert and exercise our inherent right of self-determination for the protection of, well, there's something in front of it now. Can someone move the chat? Okay. So, let me start this over. We assert and exercise our inherent right of self-determination for the protection of our lands and our Edwendowsijik as affirmed by the Anishinaabe Nation Edwendowsijik Naukniga, 2008. Here we are, 2025, but we will stress the importance of this and we will do it. So to follow through on this, there's a couple of key aspects, and one of them tonight is for you to all know what is contained in all of this declaration. This will be like the Chinaknigewan, only it's going to be our Edwendowsijik Naknigewan, and those are the key principles. And I also want to tell you that in the English version of our Edwendowsijik Naknigewan, the draft one, we have what we call an addendum. And those are some of the other aspects that we talked about at Bauti when we had our time together. And the addendum contains other key aspects of Edwendowsijik Naknigewan. And it refers to those rights that have been guaranteed by the United Nations as well, and other aspects that are inherent within our own constitution. And it's there, it will be available. We didn't have the time to really work on it to put it in the Anishinaabe, but we will continue to work on really recognizing the importance of our language and all that entails. And right now, when we think about it, our treaty rights and other rights, our inherent rights, are so crucial because we see what's happening with the terrorists coming in, and they're trying to make us pay tariffs on our resources that we never gave up. So it's so important, I guess. I don't know how much time I have left. Okay, but just to say, this is available, and if you really would like to get more information and on it about the addendum, because those are key points. And one of the key points I want to really stress is that the government of Canada, Indian Affairs right now, has to really look at all the legislation that they put in place to eliminate this, all the sex discrimination, all the other aspects in the Indian Act that was meant to not only do away with our people, do away with our lands, and bring other aspects into it. And they have to do that within the next few years. And technically, if we look at their situation right now with their governments, I don't know what's going to happen, but it seems like it's going to be challenging, to say the least, depending on who is going to be in charge of the next government. So we have this opportunity right now to implement and start working on our own Edibendausigiknaknigewan. We have it there. We have some of our communities already working on it. We just need to say, give us those resources. We can do it as well because we have the background and we have the teachings and we have our elders. And so lastly, I guess, what else was I going to say? I think that could be it. Oh, I think I did say
Yeah.
it's going to be
Yeah.
ratified.
Okay.
Okay,
What's the next steps?
okay. Me keeps in the way. Thank you for listening.
Request Jeanette and, I think we're gonna take about 10 minutes to see if any of the participants have got any comments or questions. As I said, we need to send a strong message, to preempt what Canada is trying to do, again, about tinkering with, determining who our citizens are. And, they're in a process right now of consultations that probably culminate in legislation, and we have to send a message on behalf of ourselves. To quote Gordon Wander's by, a duck is a duck, a moose is a moose, and an Anishinaabe is an Anishinaabe. We can't be anything else. So that's why it's so crucial that we in no uncertain terms, tell the government of Canada to quit tinkering. We're trying to determine who our people are. That's our role to do that. So if there's anybody on online here that wants to ask any questions of the information so far, or is there anything in the chat so far, please let's take another about 10 minutes to do that. Is anybody on? And try not to totally interrupt the whole internet here by all jumping on at the same time. Obviously.
So I just want to remind everyone, you can put your question in the chat or you can raise your hand and I'll unmute you and allow you to talk.
Okay, is there anyone at this juncture? I mean, we're going to come back to some more opportunities for questions and sessions later, but if there's anything now, we can deal with it now, or else we have another opportunity later in the program. Okay, go
We have
ahead.
a question from Daniel.
Morning, everybody. I'm coming to you from Mooneyang. I'm in Montreal right now. I'm a member of Boston First Nation, and I'm planking on Mwabjeshi. Anyway, so I just want to. Is this a good time? I have kind of three thoughts, but I don't want to jump the gun on it if we're going to talk about it later. But I have three kind of general thoughts on.
Well, go ahead, and we'll see where they fit. If we can answer them right now, we will. If not, we'll see if it fits in a little later on in the program. Go ahead.
Sounds good. Thanks. Yeah. So the first thought that I had, and I want to say that I'm offering these really respectfully and humbly as three related views on citizenship, but I'm really grateful for all the hard work that's going into this, and I think it's really crucial. So the first thing is, I think it's really important that we keep in mind that we're a nation, not only communities. And internationally, all nation states in the world have the power to naturalize citizens, and under our own laws held from time immemorial, we've always historically had naturalization via adoption, protocols that work in harmony with established relationships and protocols with all creation in the land. We and other nations, such as the Haudenosaunee, have fiercely defended that power of naturalization. And I just wanted to throw out there to everybody as part of the consultation that I think it's really important that we need to continue advocating for that power. The second thing I wanted to mention was that the Haudenosaunee have for a really long time maintained a passport document. And I think it's something that would be great for us to aspire to have as well to the International Civil Aviation Organization standards, so that we can travel internationally on land, sea, and water on our Anishinaabe citizenship. Just to keep in mind that link to kind of travel and border crossing rights when considering the question of membership. And then the last thing was really just a general thing, but I just, and I'm sure it's on everybody's mind, but just being careful about not letting the negotiations around kind of colonially defined Indian status narrow how we define our citizenship. So those were my three thoughts. Miigwech, everybody.
Yeah, maybe I could make some comment on this notion of as nations, we have the inherent right to determine our citizens. And, under international law, you're a citizen of a nation. We have a band membership
Pat,
list.
Pat, I'm going to stop you. Turn the laptop right in front of you. Yeah, there.
Okay, I'll start over again. Nations determine their citizens, and under international law, they use the word citizens of a nation, not a band member of an Indian Act band. You can be a member of the Kiwanis Club, or you can be a member of some political party, but the reality is, in the legal standing, you're a citizen of a nation, and that's why it's so important that the United Nations Declaration, Section 35 of the Constitution, and very importantly, our inherent rights as nations, we have the right to determine our own citizenship. And so that's a very crucial commentary. And on passports, we did have Anishinaabe Nation passports many years ago. I recall traveling on one as a Grand Council chief in 1980. Others used them for travel when we were lobbying on the Constitution over in England. And it's unfortunate, those passports have kind of went off to the wayside. And now with the, the computerization and high security codes on passports, we've been having discussions already. Every month, we have the nation councils, which is the Elders Council, the Quail Council, the Language Commissioner, the Children's Commissioner, and the Youth Commissioners, and the LGBT Council. We all, meet, and this was an issue that was brought up about passports, and it is on the radar screen. We have sent a message as nation councils to the political arm of the Anishinaabe Nation to start looking into that again. Obviously, the Haudenosaunee do have, passports with the required technology that's available, and it's something that I think we have to definitely work on. This question of Indian status, once we create our own citizenship laws, Ibn Dagjijig, I think my commentary on that is the Indian Act status is not going to be that important or relevant anymore, because all your rights will be contained in your Ibn Dagjijig laws, whether it's treaty rights, inherent rights, tax exemption rights, whatever rights you have, hunting and fishing rights, they'll all be embodied in the citizenship laws that we create in each of our communities. So, I think, some of the exercise, what the federal government is doing, it's no secret to us. They're trying to get rid of the Indian Act. So there is no protection, under the Indian Act registration system to a piece of legislation that's going to be probably eliminated in the near future. So that's why it's important that we occupy the field. And again, that's a legal terminology, that we have to exercise our jurisdiction and occupy the field. So that's why it's so important that we develop our Ibn Dagjijig laws. And that's why it's so important that we're advancing this declaration to tell the government, stay out of the business of trying to determine who we are. You've messed it up every time you've tried. It's up to us to determine who our citizens are. So thank you for that question. Is there any other
Yeah.
comments or
There's one
questions?
from Clayton King.
Clayton King, go ahead, Clayton.
Ani, what I say? Ani Jeanette,
Oh,
Miss Smoke, bonjour, Wapshka Constitution of Cause, Megazay Dodem. I know in the past, I've read these documents, through Chimney Singh, Bosley First Nation, and we had several discussions with Martin Bear and throughout the years and so forth. But when I'm coming back on to try to learn a little bit more of what's been done, in the last few years. Is this the same document that's on the website that had been passed back in 2007 in terms of the citizenship law, or has it been updated?
It's the same one,
Yeah, the pedagogic law that Jeanette
one parent.
and others with respect to the one parent rule is still what we're advancing, as
Mhm.
opposed to the federal government's two parent rule, and so that's that is the law that is being advanced. Obviously, if First Nations have specific characteristics that they want to embody in their own specific laws, that's quite fine and quite acceptable. But I think we're trying not to have a checkerboard approach to having all kinds of ideas about who belongs. You've been dodgy. I think we need some very basic principles, and that's what the one parent rule aspires to do. Is to say that we know our lineage, based on one parent, that they should be determined to be citizens of the Anishinaabe.
Yeah, I was just, just curious because within the citizenship law that's, available to the nation on the Anishinaabe Nation website. You discuss a lot of things that's in that document. I remember reading it years ago, but one thing that hasn't been in there that's crucial to our nation, crucial to our citizenship is our Dodamuk. There's nothing representative within this document regarding our clan system or those that belong and how our traditional values have been. A second thing is loss of citizenship that states in there too as well, to where it doesn't seem like there's a large understanding of appeal process for those if they ever were to lose their citizenship in the future. The way it's written here, because it goes back to talking about how the citizenship board will determine these things, to where it's not really a traditional outlook of what we've come to understand, but more of a colonial-based system of electing board members to control who belongs and who doesn't within this document. That's just my, I know different nations have their different Ebendowsijic laws that have been put in or have drafts and have their own way of doing things in their communities, but as a nation as a whole, it seems I know it was done years ago, and that's just my comments on it. And I don't, with all the work that's been done with Alan and all our other historians throughout our, treaty litigation processes and things like that, I just don't know why it hasn't been updated or implemented. That's all.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely bang on in your remarks. The Dodamuk clan teachings are very important. In fact, we just had a session in Sault Ste. Marie about a week ago on governance that spoke to the governance relating to Dodamuk and in these laws that are being created. There will be mechanisms in there, for appeals and redress on issues. But I'm going to ask Jeanette to make some commentary on this as well.
Uh-huh. Miigwech, for your question. And just to share with you, in our first consultation with our people, we talked about all these aspects. And what we have, the one parent rule, is just a basic document that the key essentials. From there, our people at their home communities can take that and add to it what is relevant to them, what is important. And this is where we talk about the ones that we recognize who can be adopted, made part of our Edwendausiger. And that will be up to the people at the community level, not someone residing 1,000 miles away who will decide for you, but you will be able to make those decisions on Edwendausiger, the ones who belong. And you will be able to put your own criteria. What is important to you? And then this is where we look at our clan teachings. And as was pointed out, we just had a really good workshop on looking at responsibilities of our clans and how do we incorporate that into our governance. And even when we get to the administration aspect of all of this, we talked about doing passports many years ago, and it can be done. Once we know who our people are, once we have our central body within the Anishinaabe Nation, and the Anishinaabe Nation is not just one small community, it's all of us together, and we have our, I guess, strength and the power in all of us collectively coming and saying we are all Anishinaabe people, we are all the Anishinaabe Edibendausichik. I hope I was able to explain that a little bit more. But it could be ongoing work that you can do at your level with your input, because you know who you people are.
That's one thing that I always hear, and it's always repeated. But in some communities, it's very hard for chief and councils and other administration to know who their people are nowadays. When you have about 2/3 to 3/4 of the membership live off reserve, you know what I mean. So is this really a targeted for the First Nations or the membership as a whole?
Yeah, obviously, we wanna reach out to all of our citizens,
Yeah.
no matter where they live. You know, you don't lose your rights once you get out of these postage stamped Indian reserves, and so this whole discussion is targeted at all of our citizens, no matter where they are. And you know, that is one of the challenges, I guess, with so many changes in leadership, and that's another process that's going on parallel to this is you know, talking about governance and getting out of the Indian Act election systems. These 2-year systems don't provide stability or continuity, and that's why this issue doesn't resonate, you know, as strongly as it should be, because there's too many changes in leadership. Sometimes up to 50% of the leadership changes in a relatively short period of time. So we're hoping, you know, these other processes are also going parallel. It'll put more stability in the governance of our communities by getting out of those 2-year Indian Act election cycles.
Yeah, because one of the reasons why I talked was just in terms of that board process, right? In terms of, you know, I mean, loss of citizenship, just, you know, I mean, aside from that, you know, I mean, within my own personal community, you know, I mean, you have different people who, you know, I mean, have gotten in trouble of late and they got BCR'd off the First Nation, and there's no appeal process there, but they still remain membership. You know what I mean? So there's like glitches in the matrix, so to speak, in terms of, you know, I mean, how things can evolve over time in a dictatorial process and not really a democratic way, as what I suggested earlier within our Dodemuk systems, right? So when you have a board of Anishinaabe citizenship or a chief and council to say, you know, I mean, it's almost, you know, I mean, this is our way and our way only, so to speak, right?
Well, part of the work that's going on in governance with a number of the communities is that, you know, we really want to empower the citizens, you know, that will, they're the ones that are going to make the laws and vote on them, not the chiefs and councils per se. And so, you know, I think again, it's an opportunity for this robust discussion on these topics at the community level. I think every commentary and issue like this is very relevant, very important, and needs to be addressed. And you know, I think as well, you're going to see, you know, different communities are at different stages of development in developing the Bindaujic laws, and you're going to see, you know, some examples out there where different scenarios are seen to be, you know, highlighted. And you know, you don't have to reinvent the wheel on some of these things. And obviously, there's going to be these scenarios where there's problems. You know, and you know, like, you know, even adoptions is a big issue. What do you do with you know, the non-natives in our communities? What do you do with citizens from other nations in our communities? All this is a very robust discussion that takes place. And I also just want to say that you know, we're trying to undo over 150 years of colonial oversight on our community. So, you know, we're not going to get a solution like overnight. We're going to have to try to work on this thing over the next, you know, few years. And, you know, communities are beginning this process, and we're going to have a wholesome dialogue in every community.
Yes.
So I think I've gone past the 10 minutes on this. We'll continue with some discussions, and then we'll come back for more opportunity for some dialogue. And again, put your commentary in the chats. I will for your agenda here, Jeanette, again, and we're back to having our Southeast Regional Chief Marcia Smoke. She wants to again talk about work we can do on these ensuring that we fight back against this federal government imposition of this new process they're trying to look at here of them generating ideas about what should happen with our citizenship. So I'm going to turn it over to Marcia. I think it's very important. As I said, they're going through this consultation in the next several months, and it's very important that we get ahead of the pack here and inform the government their process, to use the legal term, stinks like hell.
Okay, thank you, Patrick.
Regional Chief, we're going to need you closer to the mic or the laptop over a little bit more.
Okay,
You-
I'm moving.
Oh.
Okay. So are you okay there now?
That's a little, yeah, and maybe raise your voice just a tad.
Okay, I can speak up. Okay, I can be loud. I can be louder. Okay. I'm not going to be dealing with the Section 10 voting thresholds first. I'm going to go into the collaborative process on the second generation. So I don't know if you have those on slides. But before we start that, I do want to just in this presentation here on the collaborative process on Indian Act amendments, we're going to be talking about the second generation cutoff, and we do have graphics and illustrating the 6.1 and 6.2 loss of status and especially for the grandchildren. So we'll have those out. We're also going to be talking about the unfinished business of Bill C-38, and that has to do with the enfranchisement. And then after that, I'll ask Dave Shawana to talk about the Section 10 voting threshold. So that's what I want to cover off in this presentation here. So just as where things are at, okay. There was, of course, all these court cases that have been more recent to deal with all the missing pieces on membership and those who were excluded. And, some have been able to get their children or registered, but their sister or their brother haven't been able to get their children registered. There's been so many discrepancies there in terms of why this is happening. And there haven't been any reasonable explanations that have been provided to anyone. So we wanted to break down what was going to basically what needs to be addressed in the second generation cutoff. Now, this whole process, this collaborative process, it's very important to understand that we do have those court cases that are sitting there in the background that
Marcia, I'm just going to ask you to turn the laptop just towards you a little bit more, just so you're talking right in front of it.
Okay, can you hear me better now?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I raised the point about the court cases because those are the decisions that have been sitting there forcing the government to deal with these issues with us. Okay, so then what happened is when the with everything with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, that, of course, that document was adopted in 2007. Canada didn't endorse it until 2016 when the Liberal government came into Parliament. And then while the government was actually doing some work on dealing with these court cases, the there were delays and to actually get any work done. I mean, they put in place um, uh, a special representative to go across the country and get the views of First Nations and citizens about how the implementation would be on, I believe it was Bill S3, and that was to deal with the remaining issues on the second generation cutoff. Now, what happened at that time as well was the work that was being done on UNDRIP. During that same time, the government was looking at how they would put in place deal with citizenship under UNDRIP, which they created the legislation in 2019, and it became C-15, the UNDRIP Act. So at that point, the intent was to align federal laws with United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. So when that received royal assent in 2021, this business of the special representative going across Canada was taking place at that time. And it also came to a place where it seems like the court cases were kind of set aside and there was silence on them. There wasn't too much discussion on them anymore, but those are still very important documents because those are the cases that we won, and we can't forget about those. So but we still have an obligation to follow through on the United Nations Declaration Action Plan, which the government put into place to implement their version of the UNDRIP Act. So through the UNDRIP Act, this is where we now get into where are we here? Sorry, got my papers all scrambled here. So now when we get into the collaborative process on the second generation cutoff, the Anishinaabe Nation has been involved through Jeanette, our commissioner, through the Indigenous advisory process. And that's been very important because there's not a lot of active representation across the country. So the Anishinaabe Nation being involved in that has been very important for the 39 Anishinaabe communities. So she's always had her finger on the pulse to know what's going on and to be able to bring those documents forward, bring those issues forward, and the staff working with her through Dave Shawana's governance department have been following this and working aggressively on it as well. So one of the issues that has come up is okay, it's all up there on the screen now, is preparing for the influx of eligible members. And this is has been one of the stumbling points of government right from the beginning. And to some extent, it's been a stumbling point for us as well, because when whatever the final solution is, if it stands to reason that there will be an estimated, now I've seen we put up 300,000 there, but there is an estimated 270,000 to 400,000 additional eligible members who would be added to the membership of our communities. And so there's the question of where's the money that goes along with it, because there's going to be additional services required, and it rolls out to our land base, it rolls out to the additions to reserve process, it rolls out to all of the there's not enough adequate funding now, and that is problematic. So these are all questions that have created a delay in being able, certainly from the government side, to be able to address this sooner. Now, on their consultation process timeline, which is the process we're in right now, this is basically the next phase. And what the Anishinaabe Nation's been able to do is go through and with the work that both Patrick and Jeanette have spoken about is the citizenship declaration. And as that was all explained to you, it's really important to know that this is the guide. This isn't the work that needs to be done in the communities. This is the guide that of those principles that you should, that actually their principles were developed from community members who came out in January to our one-day meeting, and they gave their input. All of those articles that are in that document all came from members from the Anishinaabe communities that said this is what we need to have in there, and what they would feel comfortable with. So that document is basically your guiding principles for you to be able to do your work in your communities. There are resolutions in place that have been there since the mid-2000s to deal with how members are, who are going to be our citizens, who are going to be recognized. And that is what Commissioner Corbière-Laval is talking about, the one-parent rule, because what the government is proposing on this collaborative process is to go back to a two-parent rule. And all that does is delay the cutoff again for another couple of years, because it'll be the same thing, you know, the grandchildren, once everybody is reinstated, then 2 generations later, you know, it'll be based on the same type of composition as we've seen, which excludes our children and grandchildren as you know, if a person does not marry or have the father a citizen of our communities. So this just delays the process for exclusion again. So we need to be able to remember that the Anishinaabe Nation did have that work done. I mean, Jeanette has spent her lifetime working on this, so we're very fortunate to have her as a member of the Anishinaabe Nation, because she has been on this, you know, since I met her, like almost, you know, a few years ago. We were young, when we were all young and foolish. So we all knew each other back in the 70s, and when she was going through this work. So we've been very fortunate to have her being a constant on this. And there's very few people that look, you know, spend their whole lifetime on one topic. So I really admire Jeanette for sticking to it. So the Anishinaabe citizenship law that is also being talked about is some work that was done as well in the past. And the work, you know, with those, we need to look on revitalizing that Anishinaabe Nation citizenship law, because it's very important. With the developments that are going on in Canada right now, we hope to advocate for full First Nations control of First Nations citizenship. And it's also incredibly relevant when discussing the current issues that we are all facing in our communities with the implication of the Métis Nation of Ontario. And there are 2 factors there, very important. One of them is the fact that they are registering individuals whose ancestry is from our own First Nations. So when our membership issues get dealt with, when in the communities, then those people, there are a significant number of people who may drop off the Métis Nation of Ontario list, come back into our circle in our First Nations. And so that will be one impact. The second impact will be that that will leave all of those people who are still registered with the Métis Nation of Ontario, not being able to prove their ancestry, because we know very well that you know, anyone who checks off the box is you know, gets a Métis card, and the people that are running around claiming Métis status, they have their card, you know, they're interfering in the harvesting, you know, harvesting rights of our citizens. They're interfering in taking advantage of contracting, employment. They're actually harassing some of our harvesters. We have a really difficult situation with the Métis Nation of Ontario. So the citizenship is very important so that we can start, that will start paring down their membership, and hopefully they'll eventually go away, but that's too much wishful thinking. I want to make it clear, though, that I do recognize that there are Red River Métis that are in our territories that are from those areas. So I'm not referring to them when I talk about those registered with the Métis Nation of Ontario. So you know, I had one situation where one of my relatives was approached to get you know, recognition, wanted to access our programs and services, and flashed a Métis card, and I credit my nephew for saying, "What is that? Is that like a gym card?" So it was, at least he can be humorous about it. So anyway, so this whole business about the our citizenship, when it breaking it down, is going to be deal with a multitude of issues. So the mandate that we have at the Anishinaabe Nation comes to us from Chiefs in Assembly to basically expand the citizenship law, the Edabendogsa to address the topics of like gender roles, adoption, birthing, death, marriage, dotem belonging, family composition, intertribal transfers, and cross-border recognition. So that's the very important work that that you will have in your communities on how to deal with that. Those are not the discussions that that you can expect the Anishinaabe Nation to have and to put in place. These are things that affect communities. And when we talk about creating a citizenship law, we can put the framework up there, but in terms of how you're going to deal with it in your own communities, that's what's really important, and that's where the work begins. So I went through all of that just to get to the I don't know if they're putting the slide up on the screen to move me along or what, but we can go to a slide now. So anyway, if we can put up the slide on how does Indian Act status currently work. And this is, I think that's something that everyone is aware of. 6.1 is, okay, here it comes. Yes. So this is the current way. Okay, I want to talk about this just for a minute, because, you know, we all know 6.1 equals a 6.1. 6.1 to 6.2 becomes a 6.1. 6.2 become a 6.1. 6.1 and no status become a 6.2. A 6.2 and no status become a 6.2, become no status. So what I want to say about that is that this is where a lot of the confusion lies, because people are asking, what is the difference between 6.1 and 6.2? And there are actually, under 6.1, there are actually 14 different categories of how someone is registered as a 6.1 First Nation person. And the entitlement, I'll just give you some examples. Of course, the entitlement of 6.1A has to do with, you know, anyone that was entitled to be registered before April 17th, 1985. So that's 6.1A. We have 6.1C. and this goes all the way down, where it's reinstatement of individuals whose names were omitted or deleted from the Indian Register as a band prior to 1951. So there are those who are affected there. There's an amending, then there's 6.1, and I'll just say C.01. That's the amending the status of children whose parent was an enfranchised minor child. And I want to get into the enfranchisement shortly as well. There's many, all of these 14 different areas that all of these 14 different areas that affect entitlement. So all of, this chart is available on I believe on the online. I would encourage you, and as you're doing your work in the communities, to take that information and have a look at it as you're doing your work. Now, the last thing. Okay, and so the last thing I want to talk about is the Bill C-38, and that has to do with enfranchisement. And that was a bill that would bring full status back to anyone who was affected by their parents or one of the parents enfranchising, where the children were already all automatically removed off the list. The significance of Bill C-38, even though it's no longer valid, once Parliament was prorogued, the bill died on the order table. So we have to look at a way to deal with this again, because on the enfranchisement side, it only affects about 3,500 people across the country, but it reinstates everyone to full status. No questions. That's just the way that the bill was written. So we need to make sure that we bring that back. And the last thing I want to say before I'll pass it back to Patrick is that, this process that I see happening, I look at it as a process of inclusion versus exclusion. And I say that because of what I was taught, and that's to don't leave anyone behind. So Miigwech.
Very quickly, we're going to turn over to Dave Shauna. He has a couple of quick comments on the threshold issue. So Dave, take over.
Bonjour, we are in additional cause now. Good evening, everybody. My name is Dave Shauna. I'm the Director of Governance. Some of the work that we were involved in, most notably under the Department of the Anishinaabe Nation, it was called the Restoration of Jurisdiction. And it was a department that was mandated by the Chiefs and Assembly as late in the mid-90s. So I had the pleasure of working with leadership and citizens over the years to kind of support the mandate with respects to taking jurisdiction in a number of areas, particularly education, most recently with governance. And the Anishinaabe Nation is continuing its work under the child youth well-being jurisdictional issues, and as well as health. But as a governance department now, we continue to collaborate, which is now referred to as Mawkinagan, which is the Anishinaabe Nation government by way of the Anishinaabe Nation Governance Agreement. So this was an issue we're talking, the agenda speaks to the issue of the Section 10 voting thresholds and the double majority. So to approve the Anishinaabe Nation Governance Agreement, which most recently was ratified in 2022, there was issues that the community saw in the issues around external governments telling First Nations and how they would approve very significant, aspects of jurisdiction in their communities. So the Chiefs and Assembly, by way of Grand Council Resolution 2022-05, basically stated that we support our community's statement of their ability to make decisions outside of external interference. and particularly with the agreement, the governance agreement, the ratification chapter referenced the 25+1 voting thresholds, which actually had, has the inclusion of the double majority as part of the to approve the agreement back in the day. So some of the communities, and as well as the Anishinaabe Nation, said they were somewhat challenging for our communities, and we exercised a time of safety. Unfortunately, we were all struck with the COVID era, and we were challenged with those kinds of issues. But this one really stuck out. So the Anishinaabe Nation supported a statement to Government of Canada on this issue by way of this resolution. So the agreement, as I mentioned, was ratified in 2022. So the parties at that time, which was Government of Canada and those First Nations that ratified the agreement, sat down and basically amended the ratification chapter to reflect First Nations decision-making and based on customs and practices and traditions that our communities have always undertook. So Canada was agreeable to it. So we were able to support Mawkanagon amending, next slide, please. Sections 14.6 and 14.7. So 14.6 basically states that a First Nation seeking to be added as a party to the agreement will be required to follow its community approval process. So this was very significant. It took out the issue of the 25+1. And basically, the Anishinaabe Nation in Canada have agreed to that statement by way of this amendment to the agreement. So 14.7 is essentially describes the process and how communities would fulfill approving the agreement by their own customary or traditional process of decision making. So next slide, please. So the Schedule C was then developed, and it was as an addendum to the agreement. And basically, it's titled Protocol for the Addition of a First Nation as a Party to the Anishinaabe Nation Governance Agreement. And there was 4 key principles that were part of that schedule recognized by the parties. And one of them was openness. And this is where essentially the communities would ensure all sort of opportunity was available to citizens to ensure that they understand, they're fully aware of what the agreement was about, the benefits, and so that was the openness principle. Transparency, that the parties agreed to, essentially making sure that anybody and everybody that essentially was an eligible voter, there was transparent principles to make sure that the citizens were aware of what they were approving by way of the this community approval process. Access to information, anytime a citizen required information related to the agreement, that information was made readily available to citizens. Record keeping was another principle that was agreed to the parties. So the next slide will show you a graphic of essentially what is the process. Schedule C is, well, the community approval process. So there's 6 steps here that a community would undertake. BCR, of course, we're pretty standard decision making in our communities, and that would be provided to Mawkanagon, and that is the Anishinaabe Nation government, who are party to this party to the governance agreement. So in that BCR, there would also be a Part A, which basically describes how the community would undertake the community approval of the governance agreement. They would present that information to the IOC, and that is the Implementation Operations Committee, which are parties that basically oversee the implementation of the agreement. The community undertakes the implementation of the community approval process based on a work plan and timeline. A final report on the decision of the community by way of its community approval process, and then the Implementation Operations Committee basically sees that the success of the community approving the agreement, and essentially they endorse the approval. I'll just note the Implementation Operations Committee it's not necessarily just only Canada. The committee is representative of the Anishinaabe Nation government, a representative of one of the communities that are party to the agreement, and there's one representative to that on behalf of Canada, which is part of their implementation branch. So this is the community approval process. I just wanted to help describe there's been some success by way of amending the governance agreement, and the Anishinaabe Nation, by way of this, has addressed the issue about the second generation cutoff by way of that Section 10 voting threshold. So this is good news for the nation to move forward with this community approval process. Now, Ebert.
Yeah, so very quickly, with the that threshold there, it was a very onerous process because our communities have historical voting patterns, and the government expectation of tracking down people that we don't know where they are, we've lost contact with them, some people are deceased. And it just was too onerous to try to expect, that you have to get your total membership list engaged in the process when historically you have a regular voting public that participates. So this amending formula has been really a useful exercise for communities that have said, we've been making decisions for thousands and thousands of years. We don't need this Johnny-come-lately government to tell us how to run our business. I'm going to do a little bit of tweaking with the agenda. I want to go right to Leslie McGregor from Moknagon. She's the CEO of Moknagon. We want to, I guess, explore the fact that some communities, I mentioned in my earlier commentary, that are at different stages of development. Some of our communities are already working, and the Moknagon team is already working on examples of how the Bendajijig laws could be developed. So I'm going to turn over to Leslie to just give us an update on that, and then if we have some time at the end, we'll open it up for some discussion again. But keep in mind, this session is being recorded, and you still have opportunities to put your questions in on the chat. And so take it away, Leslie.
Miigwech, Pat. I know on the agenda it did say Chief Rhonda Williams-Levitt would be presenting. Unfortunately, she couldn't, and so you're kind of stuck with me. I'm actually in also a chief and council meeting, so I'm hoping to be brief and concise for you. And I'm sure Pat and Dave can do me justice when I have to go back to that meeting. So first of all, I wanted to emphasize that when we talk about citizenship and those who belong, we're talking about it as nation building. So I think, when you look at all the historical injustices that have happened to us, especially along with impacts of the Indian Act and what its intention was, when we start taking that control back, it starts with who actually are we serving, and that is your direct tie to citizenship. So under the Anishinaabe Nation Governance Agreement, citizenship is one of the laws that the communities are developing, and most of the communities currently have different stages that they're in. So you have ones that have a draft law ready, where others are still working with their communities about how they're going to move this agenda forward, how they're going to develop their citizenship laws. And I think this is probably be the toughest one for communities, because it is very close to everyone's heart. And in that, when you understand who belongs and who you're deciding who belongs, and there's major implications not only to families, but to the land as well, to the programs and services in the First Nations. And then there's direct advocacy or political maneuvering that has to happen in terms of Canada also recognizing who those citizens are and not admitting people and overriding the communities. So I think that's a real important concept for anyone who's developing citizenship laws, whether they're doing it under the Anishinaabe Nation Governance Agreement or on their own. But I think for when you're really looking at citizenship, you are strengthening your self-determination, you know, by developing these citizenship laws. You're empowering us to exercise self-government. You're reinforcing our autonomy and our decision-making capabilities. The other important point is our recognition of our own inherent rights. You know, when we look at where our rights come from, you know, the first one that you would say it comes from creation, right? And the rights bestowed upon us by Creator. So in that, and that's a strong argument with government and certainly in the judicial system itself about where our inherent rights come from. And our citizenship laws acknowledge those, and they assert these rights because we existed prior to colonization. And so it pretty much reinforces, you know, our own identity and our own. And then the last point I wanted to make about the nation building component of it is that we use our own Indigenous knowledge. When you're talking about, you know, what Dr. Corbier is bringing in terms of, you know, the one parent rule and understanding, there has to be a level of understanding about who your family is. And that ties really strictly into who you belong. So whether, you know, people are doing genealogy projects in their First Nations to identify those lines of where those families are and who actually can say that they belong to that versus, you know, generations that are coming behind us saying, this is my family lineage and this is the community that I belong to. So in terms of some of the successes, I think, as I said earlier, and that's the next slide, Arnie. I know I'm talking fast because I've got this short window. When we talk about some of the successes, it does focus on either the collaboration that's happening. It really is having communities take a look at who does belong to our community, right? And how do you determine that? Because we know within the one parent rule that you can add, or these communities can add into their citizenship laws, especially for people who've been away, who aren't living on the territory, about, you know, the culture and language and those kind of components in your laws to say, you know, what are our own Anishinaabe values? What are the practices? What are the customs? And what are the ceremonies that help make us who we are? So I think those kinds of opportunities for those kinds of collaborations and for those kinds of discussions, and that everybody has a voice in all of that. And I think that's a real important component. There's certainly downsides as we, I say, but as these communities maneuver to the citizenship, you're teasing me now, aren't you?
Sorry, it froze.
As the communities advance, so that there are some challenges, and I'm on the last slide there. And I apologize for this being very text heavy. It's very hard to condense everything in such a short time frame. But I think, you know, one of the challenges that these communities are having is this level of understanding and communication. The fact that they're developing these laws are really initiating those discussions, and you can't have very legalistic terms or it's because then there creates a gap between what you're trying to explain in terms of legalese, because when you're talking law, that sounds very formal, right, to what people understand and what they can relate to. So when they start supporting the laws or looking at all the different elements of it, that they really understand it. So communication becomes really critical in all of this. And if you use too complex a language, then people start to wonder why you're using that, and that leads to mistrust. There's community engagement is also challenging, and I think certainly for the First Nations, especially the ones under the Robinson Huron, you've been inundated with community consultations and community activities, and there is a fatigue that happens, right? And getting people to come out and review the laws because these impact them becomes challenging. And so I think, you know, when you're working with those kinds of fatigue, you know, you're looking at what's going to trigger these for people, you know, and really being open and maybe even exploring different avenues of communication for communities. I think the other one, another important component is the historical context and the government structures themselves. Like, we look at a colonial system right now, people, that's what people know, right? That's what people understand. It's hard to move to something that's different if they can't see the direct benefits, not only to them, but to the community. You know, there has to be some sort of mechanism, whether it's, you know, an education campaign or what have you, to talk about some of those things about what the Indian Act was actually designed to do, how that's eliminating us as Indigenous peoples in Canada, and what are the ways that we can move out of it. So you look at all these different elements of what the colonial government or Canada is doing, how it impacts our laws, and really going back to communities and building up the nation. So this goes again back to this nation building concept. The other considerations for communities has to do with capacity and resource. So some of them are concerned that if your citizenship numbers expand, you know, how's that going to impact the resources in the community, and resources being broad, like land and housing and infrastructure, like how is it going to be compensated? So there are those kinds of discussions, and certainly, you know, Makanagan is working with these communities and looking at tools for these kinds of issues. The last one has to do with inclusivity and ongoing commitment. So we know that the communities who are in their law development have members on their committees, and when they're presenting their draft laws to the community, there's really diverse perspectives that they're bringing in to really make sure that they have a strong law, because you have to look at things like redress, or, you know, at some point, are you revoking citizenship? Like, what does that actually look like? Is that going to challenge or be a challenge in freedoms? So you got to look at all these different potential hazards, I guess, and making sure that you have a strong law and that your law can sustain over time, right? And can sustain over all these other different policies, whether it's a new initiative from government in terms of like the bill, the new bill that was put on hold for a while, like how are those things impacting, and really helping the communities understand the difference between, you know, what are your rights, and really understanding what are your rights as Anishinaabe people, and that they're not tied to a status card. I think that's pretty much it for me.
We're going to have to wrap up, Leslie. Our time is, we've exceeded our time, and but very importantly, you know, continue to put your questions in the chat. The sessions have been recorded, and also Mary Laurent, you can see on the screen, can be contacted, all lowercase, Laurent and Mary, one word, Laurent and Mary @gmail.com. If you have any questions or input. And she's assisting our Citizenship Commissioner, Dr. Corbier, here to address any concerns or questions. We'll be having regional meetings going into the future, and of course the Grand Council to ratify this. I just cannot stress how important this declaration is to our future, and taking a stand to protect our nation, our communities, and especially our inherent rights. And we have the strength as the Anishinaabe nation that we've not fully realized. And this declaration on Ibindajig is at the core of who we are as Anishinaabe. And, you know, coupled with the Chinook Nigewin and expressed in Gudeb and Gazet Anishinaabe, these express who we are as Anishinaabe, our identity, and advancing the principles of these core documents. It ties us to our past and our lifeline to our future. So, as we're working on next steps, we're going to be building consensus. We're talking to all 4 regions within the Anishinaabe Nation through the regional chiefs meetings, and then ratifying this in at the Grand Council, or perhaps sooner if required, based on, you know, how quickly government moves on its timeline for their legislation. We want to preempt what they do by telling them in no uncertain terms that it's up to us to determine our citizenship, not the government. So also just one very, very last comment is all this has started with ceremony, and this declaration will be taken into ceremony, a pipe ceremony to ratify the final outcome, which is probably one of the most important elements. So as I said, it's been recorded. Please send your comments into the chat line or to laurentmary@gmail.com. I thank you all for participating tonight, and have a good rest of the evening and have a good rest tonight. Chimigwech, everyone. Good night.
We'll have Donna.
Donna, you want to close off?
Yeah, I'll do that. Now, Mr. Chico, miigwech trying to vengeance. Miigwech chananike for Kusanic Mishom Sunaniki, you know, give it go big. Give him some Dutch cake. You beat or you know, she can dance sick. Miigwech chananike one again, Kita, Chekino, Kneora, Chitas, to addiction, the with studying. You know, miigwech chananike one that cover some Dutch cake, check me on a big way to check no travel. Miigwech chickading, miigwech. Yeah.
Beat me, Laura.